Sean, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay, good.
It's 3:30. I can still, I'll let people in as they show up.
Okay. All right. Sounds good. Why don't we go ahead and get started? Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this webinar where we're going to discuss strategies for comprehensive school improvement, as I call it, or as Mr. Harrelson, Sean likes to call it, maximizing your capacity as a charter system. So I've learned quite a bit over the last year or two about work that Ben Hill County is doing. And primarily what we're going to do here is share with all of you the strategies that they're using. They've made some really interesting progress in some respects. In speaking with superintendents, I realized that we have some challenges before us. You have a learning loss that you're facing as a result of COVID. You've got a lot of money coming in from the federal government in the form of the CARES Act. I don't know if it's more money than you know how to spend, but one of the concerns is after 2023 or 2024, how do you implement programs with CARES Act money that will be sustainable after that? And then, of course, the overall goal is to focus on student achievement. And Ben Hill County has been doing that. A lot of our districts are doing excellent work, have made tremendous progress. But I was going to ask Sean and his team today to talk about what they've been doing the last few years. And I'll just share a few highlights. They have put in place what I call a data foundation using the MAP growth test, beginning of the year, middle of the year, and end of the year growth measure. They also use the NAVI assessment system, which drills down to the standard level. And they've used their flexibility to redefine 4 tiers for the RTI process purpose, all the way from the K through 12. This has allowed them to target the specific individual needs of each student on a standards level and focus attention on areas of weakness. Tier 2, Tier 3 is if there's basic skills missing. As a result of that, they have optimized the RTI process. They have optimized their FTE reporting. And despite actually losing students in their district, which has fewer than 3,000 students now, they have increased their FTE funding by over $2 million over the last few years. It's very, very impressive. So using their charter flexibility, they have defined each of the 4 tiers in the RTI process. They have redefined what gifted means, and they have put together various teams at each school level to focus on the needs of the students. But I have an idea that I want you to think about as you're listening to this presentation, that going forward, we could form a group that would talk on a regular basis to share ideas and perhaps work together to implement some of these common strategies that we have. My thought is if you can spend your CARES Act money now in an intelligent way and it leads to more state funding, then the programs that you would implement now would be sustainable in the longer term. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Sean. And Sean, would you prefer if Pam pull up the PowerPoint?
That would be great, Mr. Dan. Let me introduce the team that put all this together, and I'm going to let Dawn and Deanne introduce themselves, and then we'll start talking to everybody a little bit about the process of what we do. So, Dawn.
I'm Dawn Clements. I'm the assistant superintendent for human resources, but I was the high school principal when we started this initiative. So I've done a lot with the high school part.
I'm Deanne Cook, and I am now retired on disability, but I learned so much from all this that I want to keep coming back to make sure that we sustain it. When we started this, I was an instructional coach at the high school, and when I retired at the beginning of this year, I was the curriculum director for the school system.
So I guess we'll start off talking a little bit about where we're at and what we've been able to do with a little bit of data, and then start talking to you a little bit about the process. When we put the process in place, as far as what we analyzed and looked at, basically what I saw in the data was that they had an inconsistency of the instructional tier 1 process versus the opportunity of what their data was telling them on the end result of their assessments. And then they didn't have enough assessments in place, whether it was common formative or whether it was just a regular independent assessment that they were giving. Basically, they were looking at it from a grade standpoint, that as long as you got an A, then you were satisfactory across the board and academically sound. So as we started looking at it, we definitely found that there was a difference in the model of what they were using and how they were using it. The second piece in that model was they were not gaining the FTE and what they were looking for based off of the students that we had in our system. They had students that were actually in tier 4, and when we started putting this process in place and used MAP as the growth regulator, those kids in tier 4 were testing out above tier 3, and some of them in tier 2, but yet they were placed in a pre-K standpoint in tier 4, and that just stuck with them, and they had no system or regimen of understanding how they flowed in and out of the tiers based off of their success or non-success. So what we did is we analyzed the data, found that we did not have a sound process to individually monitor students based off their instructional needs, academically, behaviorally, socially, and we started putting a plan in place. And you can see at the timeline of flexibility from 2016 to actually 2021, we started doing professional development, and I'll let these ladies take over from that point.
One thing that I would say to begin with is that this is a process and it takes a lot of time. You can't do all of this at one time. And I think that the best place to start is with your district and school administration, because they have to understand what you're trying to do for it to work. And that when we did this, we started off with a retreat with our administrative staff at school level and at the district level. We included everybody, the CFO, the Title I person, because they're the ones that, controlled the money that we needed to make sure that we put all the things in place. And so once your district people and your school level leaders understand what's going on, then that makes it where you can sustain it and make it grow in the school system.
420.
But we started with PLCs. That's where you have to begin with this whole process, is understanding PLCs and
Drop them
And-
off. This-
and starting that. Once you get PLCs in place, then you can move on to the RTI process, because the RTI process depends on solid PLC work. That's how you determine what students go in what tier of intervention is through the PLC work. And just establishing PLCs in schools is more than I would say at least a year-long process. And then you continue to refine those things as the years go on. But as far as professional development, we did it with, like I say, with district leaders. Then we did it for teachers. Instructional coaches presented the professional development for teachers during their PL time. We modeled it. We watched videos. We went to other schools. We sent lots of people to Solution Trees professional development. We started with administrators, then we started sending teachers, and a ton of our people have gone to that training and understand exactly what it is that they're supposed to do.
At the high school level, it's definitely a challenge. One of the things we had to do was change the mindset of our high school teachers, and that takes a lot of time. And we did have to weed a lot of people out who didn't want to get on board. But we're still working on PLCs at the high school, because high schools have people that think that they know everything, the right way to do everything all the time. So we had a hard time getting them to buy in. But once they did buy in, we had some very good working PLCs and some that could be refined. But the PLC process really is the basis of the whole RTI plan that has been put in place here in Ben Hill. And it does take a lot of work. It's a mindset change. And if your teachers and your staff, support staff is very important for this. At each school, we have a instructional coach, an RTI coordinator, and we have a special ed coach at each school to help with these processes, because teachers can't do it all, and it's a lot of documentation, and it just takes a lot of time on everybody's part to understand what students need at the standard level, and when students are flowing in and out of the tiers, because it's not a replication of the state EIP and RAP rules. It is actually a flexible tier process. And what we've done with that process has helped us maximize our FTE.
So for all our fellow teammates out there, basically there's a high percentage of you all that, if you look at that timeline, you have these strategies in place. You have them more specifically probably in the REP services than you do in the EIP services, just because of the way of the nature of the process. And what we did is we chose that we started with K2, and we were going to implement the process K2 first, start working that process into place, figure out what we're doing right, what we're doing wrong, and then slowly move it up the chain to where it would affect kids, and they would stay in that process as they moved up from kindergarten through 3rd through 5th, and then 6, 8, and then 9, 12. And we've seen great progress with that, based off of those kids that have started originally in a K2 situation and now have progressively moved up in the 5th grade and 6th grade now, are becoming more and more successful academically. The second piece of that is that we were able to figure out how we tied the process back to the FTE and your EIP, your gifted, your REP services, and have that as a model of what our maximization of funding could look like based off of that. There's a lot of you that are looking at it going, all right, I understand what your team's telling me, Sean, but I don't understand how I get these people in place. Where does the funding come from? And that's been a conversation for a long time over the past several years, is we don't have the resources to put those people in place. Basically, it's like this. You have resources now based off of CARES funding that will support learning loss and acceleration, and that money can be used towards personnel, and that personnel is in different areas. It's in PLC coordinators, RTI coordinators, special ed coordinators, instructional technologist coordinators that we have at each school now. All those people, when they're doing their job and they're performing their PLCs and then doing the RTI process, they're in the return of the cycle, they're generating these funds that support their salaries. So as you look at what CARES is bringing you now, I want you to think about the long haul of CARES, and you're saying, well, Sean, that's great, but what happens when CARES is gone? How am I going to support these people? I promise you, your FTE will take care of itself. You will start generating maximization of funds at these grade levels, and that will support those salaries based off of that. And consolidating your money and using your flexible options under the charter system is how all that incorporates itself together in this process and allows you to be able to do things that you normally wouldn't be allowed to do. And the number one thing is putting the right people in the right place to make the process happen. And
one thing I would say is that, you know, they can speak to the money part of it, but when I was learning about this and when I was helping to implement it in schools, I had no idea that I was increasing FTE count. Honestly, all of that doesn't really make sense to me because instruction was my thing. But what we found out was when we were doing what was right for children, then it automatically increased our FTE count. Because when you use the PLC process correctly, you have students who are maybe in tier 2 for 2 weeks, and then they may go back to tier 1, or, you know, you may have a gifted student who needs a tier 2 instruction. And so when you put those people in tier 2 and you have documentation of that, nobody will argue with you that that child is not receiving those tier services because you have looked at it at the standard level and you're doing it to meet that child's needs, and you have the documentation of why you did it, what you did about it, and what the result was. And so nobody can argue with that.
we found in this process, it wasn't just also about K2. We immediately noticed it was a pre-K too. So we completely put the PLC process and the RTI process in pre-K. And during that process, we would not, unless it was an absolute doctor's prescription or a immediate disability that was evident, we would not put somebody in what you would consider the IEP process from a pre-care. We would put them in a tier 3 process and give them extensive accommodations, specifically as they started moving into kindergarten, first grade, and then use a better timeline to make determinations from there. So think about that counterbalance shift, is that when you don't have it and teachers don't have that resource, they don't know what else to do with children. So they automatically look to do the best thing, and that's give them an IEP service at a young age. Well, if you're not progress monitoring, that stays with them. And then all of a sudden that starts snowballing, and you have more and more kids that are in an imbalance in the overall process. And they're not, number one, being served correctly, and number two, they're not being funded correctly. And that balance, you'll see your kids swing. You'll see a large percentage of kids that will leave tier 4 when this process is in place and jump up to 3 and 2, but the majority of them will go to 3. Your tier 3 will expand greatly. When you look at from the charter flexibility and the interpretation of what we're looking at to do what's best for boys and girls, and you look at the MTSS and the RTI process, the difference is the RTI process defines the strict accommodations that students need, and you can give those accommodations in a better way. MTSS combines all four of them to really not allow you to have specific accommodations all the time for those kids, and be able to, number two, tie them back to FTE services of EIP or gifted. We didn't have but, good grief, 7 kids maybe in K2 that were gifted when I came in the door. Maybe 7 kids, 3, 5. And now we have the highest generated gifted population that we've probably tripled it, if not quadrupled it, based off the fact that we modified our gifted services so that it would expand different ways of looking how kids are graded to be gifted. Because you can have kids that are sitting in 2nd grade reading on a 4th grade level, but they can't think outside the box on that creative part of that gifted model test, so they don't get in. So we rewrote the handbook under our flexible waiver and said, all right, pull them out of that. And the gifted teachers design project-based learning activities. They get to pick from them. They do the activities, and then the gifted teachers grade them. And we use that as part of that service to say, yes, they passed that part of the test. So I guess it's just a different mindset in looking at how you can use your true flexible waivers and your flexibility to start looking at how you can take things that you have. For example, when you look at your waivers, you can't just use Georgia Milestone and say that's what's going to be the accommodations of what the child needs based off of the next year. It has to be a totality of evidence. And the only way that we have found that specific in nature is MAP. We changed everything to a growth mindset. Nothing is more important than 100% of our kids growing. Because y'all, when I came through the door and we analyzed the data and finally got data from MAP and several other things, NAVI, we found that almost 75 to 80% of our kids were 1 to 3 years behind in reading and math. So they're never, ever going to match Georgia Milestone's expectation of being on grade level. But can they grow a full year inside of a year? Absolutely. That's the difference of what you're wanting to see, is trying to bring those kids eventually up over time to get them to where they're on grade level or close to grade level or above grade level.
A lot of the flexibility we had was, Dr. Harrelson, when we became a charter system, is that we had a flexible schedule. We have a flexible calendar where we have 10 PLC days built in a year to provide professional learning to our teachers, or for them to work in their PLCs, to look at curriculum, vertical alignment, horizontal alignment. We've consolidated funds, which has helped us, and we've waived seat time for high school courses. So if students want to move through high school, at a more rapid pace or take different courses, they can do that. We've waived certification so we can get specialists in here to help us meet the needs of our students. And in grades K5, we put in something called win time, it's called What I Need. And it's based on, like Ms. Cook was saying, on standards. We have a guaranteed and viable curriculum where we know every student, if they get certain standards at their grade level, they'll be ready for the next grade. So our win time is based on how a student masters that standard, and they evaluate those standards with common and formative assessments and NAVI, and then they develop interventions that all students get if they need it. The teachers do that in the PLCs, and they also give acceleration to students who may have already mastered that standard and need it at a deeper level. So we have some students who might be in 3rd grade reading, but they might be reading at a 5th grade level. So during that win time, they go and take 5th grade standards in reading. Some do that in 6th grade math. It's just a different flow and it's a different look. And I was a traditional teacher. I taught math for 15 years and, we didn't do this when I was teaching. And so it is a mindset and a mind shift, change for districts.
One
Hey,
of the
Don,
things-
can you talk a little bit about the power standards?
With power standards, what we did, we looked at a variety of things to decide on our power standards. Each grade has somewhere around 12 to 15 standards. That doesn't mean that we don't teach all of the standards. That just means that those are the ones that we're saying that a child has to master to be able to go on to the next grade. Those are the ones that we address during win time. Those are the ones that we do common formative assessments on. And so what we did, if you look at Marzano's work, they've already done a lot of that with critical concepts. And you can actually purchase those, and we did. Now you can modify those, and we did that too. But we didn't want to start from the very beginning when they have all those researchers who have already looked at, they looked at assessments, they looked at what was needed for the next grade, they looked at so many things that we use that as a basis for choosing our standards. We let teachers do this work under the supervision of the instructional coaches and the curriculum director. And so those are the standards that we all agree. And that's one of the things about a PLC is it empowers teachers to be in charge of their classrooms and to take ownership of what their students learn. And that is one of the things that teachers really want. If they're trained properly, then they really get into that and they really feel like they're making a difference, and they feel like our teachers say we're finally being treated like professionals, because when they work together, they get to make decisions about what their children are going to learn, how they're going to learn it, what you're going to do if they don't learn, what are you going to do if they did learn, or if they already know. And by the way, those are the questions that drive PLCs. And so the teachers get to make those decisions, but it all has to be based on data that comes from MAP, or comes from common formative assessments, or comes from NAVI, or comes from a teacher's observation of what a child did in a classroom. And so they all sit down together with their common assessments. They bring the data ready to go in their PLC, and they look at, okay, on this standard, Miss Smith, what did your students do? Miss Brown, what did your students do? Oh, well, Miss Jones, your students got it all right. What did you do? And then they decide, whose classroom is going to remediate those who just absolutely didn't get it, who is going to work with those who just need more practice, who is going to accelerate those who learned it or who already knew it. And then during the win time, that's what they do. They switch classes. But again, I will say that all of this is a process. It takes a lot of professional development. It takes patience. It takes putting processes in place that are common throughout a school. And it takes monitoring by administrators and instructional coaches. But if you do all of those things correctly, then teachers really like that. They don't feel like they're alone anymore. They're working as a team, and their whole team is responsible for all the children in that grade.
So when you look at the RTI process and you start looking at how we use flexible options, basically what it allows the teacher to do is have the availability to understand that every child's different and that every child needs something different based off the standard that they might be teaching. But they also understand that everybody learns differently, and the fact that Dawn might be a person that likes to be to hear lecture, and she gets it that way. Deanne might be project-based learning. So we try to make it a free realm in the PLC for them to choose what it is and the style of how the manner of delivery is going to come across. But even more with that autonomy is that when we consolidated funds, and this is a big key, when we consolidated funds, basically when you have it as a K-5 unit, you all are getting title funds. And what's happening is you're using your title funds as they were written to be used. And that's create a Title I teacher that does remediation or acceleration based off of that. The difference is if you don't waive the FTE model, you'll use the old FTE model, which says, all right, if I'm Dawn and I'm teaching 1 to 14 and I have 3 segments that I can count because I'm doing remediation and there's 12 of these kids I can count in there. Well, under the law, under the old way, we can't count any of those kids because you're receiving title funds for their salary. So by consolidating the funds, title loses its identity. Even though on paper you're still tracking where it's going, they become a teacher, not a Title I teacher. So now if she's got 14 kids, I get to count all 14 kids and maximize their segments under the EIP services of what we're offering. So that's generating more funds, but it's also what's best for our boys and girls. And right now we have what, 12, 13 extra teachers at just K-12 that we've earned through this FTE process that are providing smaller group instruction services and lower class size based off of that to help offset what the RTI process is asking us to do for accommodations in the Tier 4 process. And the next piece is that in the consolidated model, we take the consolidation of funds and we split that up evenly based off the fact of what the schools earn. So we'll take 10% off the top and we buy MAP and we buy Navi, and then here's the rest of it that we earn based off of FTE and the general fund of what we receive. Then we split that up and we give that back to the schools, and the school leadership team decides what they're going to spend their money on in their SIP. So they go from the PLC to the leadership team and say, look, we want this program, or no, we want to buy 3 extra people to come in at contracted services. We'll pay them $50 an hour every day for 3 hours, and they'll do reading services for those 3 hours for 3 or 4 days a week, or they'll do math small group for 3 or 4 days a week, and we contract service with those people based off that hourly rate, and that's how they utilize their money in a smarter context based off of the tier process and looking at the accommodations that are needed. The same thing we're trying to do with acceleration is that in the accelerated model and the gifted model, most of your teachers are only being able to serve your kids 1 time a week, maybe half a day if at best. Our goal is we're going to turn around and try to make it to where we can serve them twice a full day during a week, because that's what's best for them, and start turning that curricula to make it stronger in the overall standpoint of acceleration. So,
Sean, you talked about wind time. What about hurricane time?
Hurricane time is very similar to wind time, but at a middle and a high school, it's hard to have students running around everywhere and swapping. So you really have to think about how you want to use hurricane time. We built in a 40-minute period at the high school where we focused on literacy, and that was we did vocabulary instruction using Marzano's 6 strategies for vocabulary instruction, and all of our teachers were trained on that. And during that time, they actually used high frequency words that students didn't know, because we had probably 70% of our students who were not on their correct grade band for high school. And we just had a really huge reading problem. And so we focused on vocabulary. And then we also purchased a program. I forget the name of it, but it gave everybody a vocabulary test. And then it gave them a prescription for what they needed for vocabulary. So they did that 3 times a week during hurricane time, and the teachers did the vocabulary instruction during that time. We actually generated about $500,000 in remedial funds because we used that segment to do remediation for reading using 1 or 2 strategies. And you can't be something big at a high school. It has to be something specific that every teacher can do. And that's what we focused on because that was our biggest weakness was reading. And at middle school, we did some of the same type of things. When we were there, we had a reading program, and it was based on science and social studies standards. Students read every day. We had a 30-minute intervention period where students did informational text reading and had to answer questions and things like that because we had a huge reading problem there as well. And so that was kind of where all this started for me as a leader.
That was a really good program because we use the standards from each grade band for science and social studies to pull those articles. And then we taught the children close reading strategies. And so whatever they were reading, they could relate it to whatever they were doing in science and social studies, but they were also learning those annotations and everything and we did vocabulary during that time too. And we did comprehension with the questions. And so, but we had to do a lot of professional development with teachers on that too, because at that time, close reading was not, something that everybody knew how to do, but that was a very successful program.
And to be clear, the time in hurricane time does not resemble a hurricane. It's that you guys are known as the Purple Hurricanes. Is that right?
Well, it could be either way.
It might depend on what day it is, whether it's resembling a hurricane.
That might be a little confusing for people who don't know your mascot name. So,
Yes, sir.
But it's a point of pride is
Yes.
really what we're saying.
Yes.
Could you guys walk through then the impact on the FTEs and so on, starting on slide 14?
Yes, sir. So what we want to emphasize is that, y'all, this is a process that it's a process that's geared to how your kids are, your teachers are, your school culture is, and in implementing it to the best way that fits those needs based off of that. There's teammates out there that you're saying, okay, Sean, I got more of an acceleration problem than I do a remediation problem. So when you start looking at this process, it's about the process. And the process means that you have flexibility to do just about anything you want to try to work something in that's positive in nature that helps teachers and students become more successful. So for example, scheduling. Scheduling is the key. I can't tell y'all, in all honesty, these ladies, they walked in one day and we had put it in, I believe, in 3rd through 5th grade, and the schedule was just not working. Our kids, teachers were just having a tough day and a tough time with it. And they talked about it in PLCs. And I said, so change it. And they're like, well, change it right now? I said, change it tomorrow. Figure it out in PLCs what it is you want to do that's going to meet the kids' needs, that's going to meet the teachers' needs to meet their needs, and change it. And that's what's got to be able to happen, is that what you do right, you keep doing and you keep doing well and make it better and better. But what you are running into obstacles, you change it and go and figure how you go around it to make it more successful. So in that process, by changing your scheduling, and these girls will attest to it, that flexibility of changing your schedule is going to allow you to maximize more segments that you can serve boys and girls.
Yeah, that's how we maximize our dollars at the high school for sure. Just putting in that hurricane time, we just took a few minutes off each block. And, that was the first time we had really ever done anything like that at the high school. And it was a big shift there because people were like, what are you talking about? We're going to do a 30 or 40-minute intervention time for vocabulary. They really didn't like that, but it helped our students, and we could see through the data on a Huff and Mifflin screener or reading inventory, whatever you want to say, that it helped our Lexile scores go up. So, it's just the strategy has to be universal in the school, and you do have to inspect it. And what you expect, you have to inspect. So we had to make sure our teachers were doing what they were supposed to do.
At the middle school, one of the things that we saw there, we set the goal. We let the teachers set the goal. Of course, we're leading in the direction that data dictates, but we let the teachers set the goal. We did the professional development with everybody. We gave everybody a job. It didn't matter if you were a coach, a parapro, or whatever. Everybody had a job during that time. So it really felt like in the school that we were all working together for a common goal on that. And it really kind of brought our faculty together in looking at literacy and understanding how important it was to help our children to read better and on a higher level. And but you have to really work hard to build that feeling of community and that feeling of we all have this goal and we can meet it together.
Well, Deanne, you said earlier that really when you started this process of redefining tiers 1, 2, 3, and 4, and the flexible schedule with the hurricane time and wind time, that your goal was to improve academic achievement.
Absolutely.
And do you feel like that has happened?
I feel like that has happened. Now, growth happens almost immediately. Achievement takes longer.
Yeah.
But our teachers have become better instructors, and they can tell you what their children need, and they can tell you what they did to meet that need. And that is a huge improvement. One of the things that I would say about RTI is I think that was one of the biggest mind shifts for our K-5 people, because they were, well, I'll just tell you, as a former middle school person, RTI didn't have anything to do with me as a teacher. That was something we sent them down the hall to connections. And, they were in a class, and as an ELA teacher in 8th grade, it didn't have anything to do with me as far as I knew. But in K-5, they had their programs, like if you were on level 2, you went to this program for 2 days a week for 30 minutes. If you were on tier 3, you went to this program for 4 days a week for 40 minutes. And I'm just making those up, but it was very regimented, and there was lots of documentation involved with that. And you couldn't move from one until you had done these certain things to move to the other. And so, but when you do it the way that we do it, teachers really buy into it once they let go of that, because their documentation comes when they meet in their PLCs together, and they're looking at one standard at a time, and they're doing something about it right then. And if that student masters it, they go back to tier 1. They don't have to stay in tier 2 for, half of a semester. They don't have to stay in tier 3 for a whole semester. If they need to, they can. If data says that that's what they need, then that's what they do. But if their data shows that, okay, they have mastered this standard, then we go back to tier 1. And I'm sorry.
No, I'm sorry, I interrupted you. Go ahead.
And so instead of having to fill out formal papers for students to be in tier 2, their PLC notebooks are the documentation. And we've had people come in here and question what we were doing. And when they look at what teachers are actually doing for every student to look at by standard and what we did for it, we have not had anybody yet that came back and said, no, you can't do that. Everybody's like, oh, you're doing actually more than what is required. But, as far as instruction goes, I think it improves it greatly. And I think that students know more about what it is they know and don't know. They know that, if I didn't get this right, I'm going to go to a class at wind time. It's not anything that's a negative. It's just what I need. And when you approach it like that, students can buy into it too. They know they need something.
Yeah, and the foundation for that really is the assessments, where you have that ongoing data.
That's right.
Every week or two, and then each quarter. And then also your PLCs, right?
Absolutely.
Coordinate all that. So this slide 17 we're looking at, what does this show?
So basically, if you look at it, when I came in the door in 2016, if you look at it, that's when we start analyzing what the data was that we had and where the problems were lying, what we were doing well, what we weren't, but we didn't have enough data to really make sense of it. So between 16 and 17 is where we started the initiation of the process of starting to change and train people in the PLC RTI process. And that was K2. And then we started, different schools were at different levels. So the middle school where Dawn had once been was much, much better. So we allowed them to also be implemented in that process. But our elementary school was much further behind. So as we started the process and training everybody and changing the mindset and putting consolidation in, then we became charter in 2018. So as we started putting our flexibility in and the process of PLC RTI and looking at the academic data, look at the difference that you start seeing after 18 when we put in the flexibility and consolidation of funds through 19. Now look at the jump and the difference of what you have in a funding model based off of maximizing your funds after the process is put in place effectively. People are understanding it and we're utilizing it across the board with the same process in all the schools. The second piece is you say, well, Sean, that's great. What'd you do academically? Well, we had the highest graduation rate we've ever had in the past 2 years. And we went from a failing school system to having 3 reward schools with the highest growth. And that tells me that we're moving in the right direction. Now, if you measure it on a Georgia milestones or anything like that, it is not going to be at the measure of what they're asking for. But are our kids growing and becoming better and getting closer to being on grade level? Absolutely. And that's the goal of what we have for everybody here, that every individual student is going to be successful at their best ability academically.
One thing that I also want to bring up is that if you use PLCs correctly and you use the data correctly and the process correctly, it creates equity for your students as far as instruction, which sometimes as teachers, as just human beings, we look at certain people and we make judgments about what they would know, what they wouldn't know. We know we have a gifted kid, we know their parents, we assume they know everything. But when you're looking at the data by standard, it's not about who that child is, where they came from, what color they are, any of that stuff. It is about, did they master the standard or did they not? And then you do your remediation or your acceleration based on that. And based solely on that. And so if you do that correctly, then it creates more equitable opportunities for all of your students.
Excellent. Well, we're at 4:17, so we have about 13 minutes left. If we could go down a few slides here. You guys have slides in here about the new challenge. Let's go. I think offsetting the new challenge. Is this where you did your gifted manual?
Yes, sir.
Could you talk about that for just a minute or two?
Well, we worked our gifted manual. I will say, our gifted manual, we did write it and we did put it in as far as in our RTI manual because we wanted our gifted students to be included in that. If we find out, we treat our gifted students like we do everybody else with regular instruction. If they don't master something, then they have to go into one of those classes that we would consider a tier 2 intervention.
Right.
And so, but, we do give them their gifted services on top of that. But one of the things that we did that really has helped not only our gifted numbers, but all of our teachers in general is that we started teaching our own gifted certification cohort. So Ms. Clements and I started this last year, and this is our second year with that. And so we've had about 25 teachers to get gifted certification right here in Ben Hill County with us as the instructors. And, you know, we have a certain curriculum that we use based on what RISA and the PSC says. But then also that gives us the opportunity to emphasize things that we're working on in our school system to help those teachers understand how to apply the concepts that they learn in the gifted classes in our school system. And so that's something that's been really successful, and we paid for it for our teachers. And so all they had to do was be willing to come to a few face-to-face meetings last year. It was all online this year because of COVID. But all they had to do was be willing to do the work and come to a couple of classes here in the county. So that's something that has really been beneficial. And whether those teachers teach gifted or not, the strategies that they learn in there, they're good for all of our students. And they just offer more opportunities within our RTI process, you know, for a teacher to say, you know, I know how to address these students who already have this. I know how to take it to a higher level because that's something I learned in my gifted certification courses.
So you had a challenge with declining enrollment, and also you were losing students in the RTI process, in the early grades process. So
Yes, sir.
one of the
About-
answers,
Yeah.
yeah.
Over the past 5 years, we've lost 250 kids plus. And with that loss of students, we're still generating more funds than we've ever generated before. And that's the offset that I want our teammates to understand is the process is what's best for boys and girls. No two ways about it. It's also what's best for teachers. But in the other side of it, it generates the funds. Even if you're losing FTE, you'll generate more funds to be able to support your teachers and the needs they have in their classroom, and then particularly in their overall school by either personnel or other resources.
Yeah, so looking at this slide 24, I think you showed us a slide that showed you had over $2 million in additional FTE coming from the state.
Yes, sir.
And, are these some of the purposes you're using those funds for?
That's exactly right. If it's basically we're taking all those resources that we're gaining back. So the last FTE count, we gained over $2 million based off of that, and we're putting it back into our services and our schools to broaden the availability of resources across the board for our boys and girls, whether it's high school and creating more elective classes, whether it's in K-5 and we're putting in 0.5 classes that if because of COVID now that we're getting data back, if you're still not mastering what you need to be to go up to second grade, that we can put you in that 1.5 until you make that transition of mastering those standards to put you in the next grade level. The same thing with gifted. Those kids sometimes are going in and need that 0.5 above so they can jump into the full class above.
Well, I think that's very exciting. I know you guys are doing a lot in the virtual hybrid face-to-face space with technology. Could you talk about that just for a minute or two? And then I'd like to see if there are any questions.
Mr. Dan, basically the way we look at face-to-face and look at online learning, it's both the same thing. We have received grants based off of RUS and several other opportunities, which allows us to put the cameras and the interactive boards in place that Wiregrass for our high school kids. We have Wiregrass teachers on our campus, and we have our teachers on their campus. So it's a very unique situation. But think about it like this. If Wiregrass had a class that our kids wanted to dual enroll with and it was overbooked, we can now put either a parapro or another certified teacher of another subject area in that room and pay them maybe extended day or whatever it needs to be. And those kids would be able to take that class via online face to face because we're putting the technology in that allows that to happen. So when we look at face to face, it's real live timing of interaction with the teacher. You just might not be sitting in the room with them at that time. The other piece it brings is that we're putting in a data bank that will allow us to store all of these live recordings. And now you go back to a remediation acceleration point that kids and parents can go into that bank and log in and pull up that lesson from the day. And the parents can see what they've been doing, that they can help them at home or remediate or accelerate with them based off of that. And we found it to be very, very good in the time of COVID as we've made this transition, but it's also opened up in the time of shortage of teachers. We have a full partnership under the College and Career wall-to-wall design that we partner with Irwin County. So Dr. Clayton and I, he has been having trouble finding an ELA teacher. I'm going to put the equipment into his school in 2 classrooms, and his kids will be able to do the same thing and go face to face, or online live, and take ELA from our teacher. We're not going to charge him any FTE. We have that agreement, but they'll be able to get the credit for ELA.
Okay, well, I know there's a ton to talk about there, Sean. It's about 4:25. I'd like to try to wrap up, and I'd kind of like to circle back to what we started out saying. And it's my hope that we can form a group or a cohort, if you want to call that, going forward. We have about 18 districts who registered for this webinar today. And I would like to see a collaboration, walking hand in hand, a group of districts to implement some of these practices, some other best practices that districts may be following. Because a lot of superintendents, as I said, have expressed concern they're getting this big spike of money over the next couple of years, not even sure how to spend it, and how do you get to a sustainable point. And it seems like financially, this is a way to get to a sustainable point with those resources. And at the same time, really, in a very targeted way, start focusing on the academic needs of the students. So I guess I would like to throw it open. If anybody has any questions, does anybody have any questions out there? Okay, I'm not seeing any questions. So what I'll do is I'll be sending out an email to this group to gauge what level of their interest there is in forming a cohort going forward, where we could have regular conversations among ourselves and perhaps schedule another session like this. And Sean, I'll leave it to you to sort of summarize and wrap up from your perspective.
Yes, sir. Mr. Dan, to our teammates out there, listen, I completely understand it. It's like we're talking Chinese, and Sean, you're crazy. This is too complicated. I want you to understand we're here to help you at any given time. These are the experts. They know it inside and out. And if you want to learn about the process, or maybe even think about how you establish the process, that's what we're here for. We're wanting to share because y'all got things we want to steal. And, we're all in the same boat, is eventually this money is going to run out, and then how are you going to sustain moving forward? And wouldn't it be nice to generate these funds on the side while you already are paying for those services and free money, and then you can bank this money on the side? And number two, it's just truly what's best for boys and girls. And you can do it any way you want to. It's about putting the process in place, and that's the key to it all.
Yeah, and to be clear, this is not a one-year process. This is a multi-year process. So if we go down this road, it could go on for some time, but I think it could be very interesting and very rewarding.
Can I say one more thing, please?
Sure.
Because I never, ever want to get to a point where I forget about teachers. And all of this stuff is wonderful. But if you do not present it to your teachers in a very organized, positive way, they will be so stressed out and they don't need any more stress. So you have to be so careful how you present this to teachers and how you do the professional development and what your expectations are for teachers. Not only so they'll buy into it and do what's good for children, but we want to take care of them too.
Well, really, you're forming the PLCs so the teachers become the decision maker, the integral planners here. And really what you're doing is supporting the PLCs.
Absolutely.
That becomes the job of the central office, right?
That's right.
You're having a PLC today. So Tuesday, when we had our meeting based off of option B, that's a PLC. People are having common collaborative conversations about certain topics and sharing ideas. And that's what a PLC is all about. The next thing is you start using data to support your decision making. And that's basically how PLCs run.
Okay, well, we're at 4:30, so we're going to stop right on time. Thank you so much to Ben Hill County. Deanne, it's good to see you again.
It's good to see you too.
I can tell you still have a passion for this, and that's great to see.
Definitely.
So to everyone else, thank you again for being on this webinar, and we'll be sending out the PowerPoint and we'll be in touch. Okay.
Thank y'all very much for your time today.
Thank you, Ben Hill.
Thank you, Fred.
You the man. You the man.